All right, so let's see where we are. We had implemented this login that looks for a user by retrieving that user from the server by searching username and password, and it's coming back with that object. And once we have that object, we then navigate to the profile, and the profile then uses the ID to retrieve that particular user from the local array, right? So let's move this as well to the server side, right? And let's see. We have right now the profile controller. There it is, right? And it's init. Notice what it's doing. It's calling this findUserById, which is implemented in the service right here. findUserById. There it is, which is iterating over the users and retrieving that user from the array. So let's move this to the server. So instead of this, what we want to be able to do is use an HTTP request and also now read again, right? Retrieve from the server using the following URL, API/user/ followed by the ID, right? User ID. Okay, right, and so this is going to go out to the server. Let's see if we refresh now. Notice that let's actually refresh this. Oops. Notice that it went out to the server. The request went out to the server, API user 234, but the server doesn't know how to handle this. So it says, I have no idea what that is. Okay, and notice that it's red, right? It came back with a 404. Right, so the server did not respond. So we need to map that as well on the server side. So let's go to the server, and the server is right here. There it is, right? And we had created this request for the user by credential. Let's now create one using the ID. So /ID, user ID. There it is, right? And we'll implement that in a function called findUserById. Okay, and then implement that in a function of the same name. So function findById again receives request and response, and it's going to try to find the user using that ID. Right? We're going to retrieve the user ID from the path. Notice that the username and password, we retrieved it from the query, right? Everything that is after the question mark. Whereas over here, we're going to retrieve it from the path. See that? So these are referred to differently. They're both parameters, but these are referred to as query parameters, right? After the question mark. Whereas this is referred to as a path parameter, a parameter that is embedded in as part of the path. Make sense? Right? So let's retrieve that. We can say var user ID. We can retrieve it still from the request. Remember, the request is an object that contains everything that came from the server, including this path, right? Path parameter. But if unlike the query parameters, they're not found under query. Instead, they're found under params. Okay? And under params, we can then ask for the name of the parameter. The parameter is called user ID. Okay, there it is. And we're going to store it locally, a local variable called user ID of the same name. Yes? Okay? Now that we have that, we can look for a user that has that ID. Right? We can say var the user is equal to users.find, and then here's a user object. The user object as it's iterating over all the users, and we're going to return true if the user ._ID matches our user ID that came as a parameter. And we could just return with the response. We're going to send back the user. Now, notice that we've been using the send here, send. Right? This send is a very powerful method in Node.js. Right? It's a very smart function. It's overloaded in such a way that depending on what this is, it behaves differently. You know, if you pass a number, it knows that this is a HTTP code, right? Instead, that if this instead is HTML, it knows that it'll encode it as HTML. If this is JSON, it knows that it'll encode it as JSON, right? So it's a pretty powerful function. But there are other functions that are a little bit faster, that doesn't have so much overhead of checking to see what the content is and how it should format it. If you know that it's JSON, right, there is a dedicated function called JSON that it only knows how to send back JSON and format it in the correct way. Okay? So if you know that you're going to send JSON, so use JSON. Make sense? All right. So if we refresh, restart the server, we refresh. Notice that the service came back. There it is, and it came back with that particular object, the user object. But notice that no longer are we populating the left-hand side, right? And the reason is that the controller still is expecting an object, right? Instead, what it's getting is a promise, right? So we need to rewrite the controller to consider now this asynchronous communication, right? So this findUserById, we're no longer receiving this user. You see that? Instead, we're receiving the promise. So just like before, we can say promise, right? And we're going to say promise, and then if it's successful, the browser is going to notify us by calling this function if the call was successful, right? And pass us the data that's coming from the server. Yep. And what are we going to do when it comes back? We're going to bind the object that came back from the server for the template for rendering. Make sense? Right. So if we refresh, we broke something. Let's see what's going on. Console. Success of undefined user. Find user by ID. Let's see. The service. Oh, we never returned it. Return that promise. Okay, so let's do that again. There it is. So we're back where we were 2 minutes ago, right? We replaced it, so now that the find now exists on the client. Okay. All right. So let's remove this from there. Okay. And so no longer do we have a need for this array here. Well, actually, we still need it for this update, right? And we will do that in the next video, right? Any questions so far? Everybody good? All right. Let me stop this.